Our Law and Justice story tonight, shocking evidence shows Mayor Mike Bloomberg attempting to buy political influence. Surprise, surprise. Bloomberg is paying the salaries of special assistant attorneys general in 10 different states, including Washington, D.C., Delaware, Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maryland, Minnesota, New Mexico, New York, and Oregon. And he admits to it. Here's how the thing works. In 2017, Bloomberg's nonprofit donated $5.6 million to the New York University School of Law's State Energy and Environmental Impact Center. The center then hired lawyers as so-called research fellows and provided these lawyers to state attorneys general offices. There, the lawyers helped pursue progressive policy goals through the courts, like radical environmental policies and climate litigation. In other words, Bloomberg, a private citizen, is paying for law enforcement offices to push his own personal political agenda. And Democrats, who constantly complain about money in politics, they don't seem to have a problem with this. With me now to discuss, Executive Director of New Civil Liberties Alliance, Mark Chenoweth. Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
All right, Mark, talk to me about this. I mean, this is kind of an interesting story, I think, because everyone knows Bloomberg is buying his way onto the debate stage tonight, just like he did last week. He's spending hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising, and apparently, reportedly, he's set to spend hundreds of millions more on campaigns just against Bernie Sanders. But this is buying law enforcement offices, if not officers personally, to do his bidding. How is this ethical?
It certainly has the appearance of putting the state prosecutorial resources up for sale. And I think that ethics is one of the main problems here. For example, we don't know what the investment portfolio is of Mr. Bloomberg and what the impact that any enforcement actions that these special assistant AGs might have on his investment portfolio. So that's the main ethics issue that comes up. But there's also a very significant due process issue here for anyone who is the target of an enforcement action brought by one of these special assistant AGs. And what I mean by due process problem is that the prosecutor is supposed to be someone who's disinterested. They're interested in making sure that justice is done, not necessarily in stopping any particular company or taking issue with any particular business model or business practice, as long as it's a lawful practice. But when you have someone in the office whose only job is to go around looking for violations of a particular sort, then they have an interest in finding those. And when a prosecutor has a particular interest in the outcome of a case, that's the very definition of bias.
Well, yeah, meaning you can't tell if someone is targeting you only because he wants to have his salary continued to be funded by Bloomberg, who has an interest in this special assistant to the AG finding climate-related crimes, if you will. And the idea, they claim that they're nonpartisan, but I'd like to address that for a second, because when I read that this organization claims they're nonpartisan, my reaction was, please. I mean, they've taken 300 legal actions against the Trump administration in the past 3 years and, 3 years and 2 months since President Trump was inaugurated, and they have a specific individual. It's the State Impact Center Executive Director. His name is David Hayes. He's also, by the way, a former member of the Clinton administration and the Obama administration. He sent an email to state attorneys general, and this is what he said: the opportunity to potentially hire an NYU fellow, that's these Bloomberg fellows, is open to all state attorneys general who demonstrate a need and commitment to defending environmental values and advancing progressive, clean energy, climate change, and environmental legal positions, end quote. That's not exactly nonpartisan. That seems extremely partisan.
Well, and it's also asking folks to make a pre-commitment to their position on particular issues without regard to what the particular state law is that they might be enforcing. And that, again, brings back in the due process problem that we talked about. And from a partisanship standpoint, imagine if the shoe were on the other foot. Imagine if this were an Exxon or a Koch Industries that were going out and hiring fellows to work in state attorney general offices, maybe to go after alternative energy companies and violations of the law that they might be conducting, say the birds that their windmills are killing or something like that. Can you imagine that the mainstream media would be okay with that? I suspect they would be going ballistic.
Oh, they'd be popping a gasket for sure. The Democrats would freak out at such a thing. So explain to us what some of this climate-based litigation or these, let me quote from David Hayes here again, what these progressive clean energy, climate change, and environmental legal positions are. What does this mean to these 10 different states, plus Washington, D.C., who are facing these special assistant AGs?
Well, it could mean different things in different states depending on what the state law is. But one of the things that seems to be consistent across those states that have taken the funding is that they're interested in pursuing climate change litigation. That is, holding companies responsible for changes in global temperature. And aside from the fact that some litigation that's been attempted along those lines has already been struck down in federal court, for example, the children's case that was brought out on the West Coast, this is a very high-risk kind of litigation that a state AG ordinarily wouldn't be willing to put their state budget dollars behind because it is so speculative. But if they get the free resource to do it, then they're much more likely to engage in such speculative litigation.
All right, so talk to me then about the impact that this should have on Bloomberg's presidential run. I mean, his numbers are growing in the polls as he spends more money on ads that are just everywhere. You can't look anywhere and not see a Bloomberg ad. Should this disqualify him because of both the ethics issue and the due process issue?
Well, I certainly think it raises questions. I mean, someone might want to ask him what is in his investment portfolio, and is that benefiting from these philanthropic decisions that he's made. I think he wants to have the appearance of his philanthropy being nonpartisan and disinterested, and maybe that's the case. But if he's not turning over what his investment portfolio is, at least in this particular example, it's hard to judge whether the investment is really disinterested or whether it's just advancing in his portfolio interests.
Right, and this is also an example, by the way, of why you can see, or where you can see that the other Democratic candidates don't really care about what they complain about all the time. They complain about money in politics. They complain about wanting a neutral justice system, and they're not really interested in making sure that either of those things happen, because if they were, they would constantly be attacking Bloomberg for these things. They'd be calling him out for these specific issues, but they don't. My guess is they don't because they want Bloomberg's money. If he doesn't become the nominee, they want his money behind their campaign. But they don't call him out for these things. They don't even bring it up, and neither does the mainstream media. And that should show you more about the agenda of the left and the mainstream media, but I repeat myself, than anything else. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.